Hi everybody, I'm back. So this is going to be part two. If you haven't watched part one, go to my channel and look up the video on grooming and you can kind of catch up before you start on this video. So this isn't going to be easy for me to talk about. I don't enjoy talking about this. I know that there are people in the church who think that those of us who are speaking about our abuse are doing it to sort of gain 15 minutes of fame or, because we want to play the victim. And that's not it at all. I'm talking about these things because A, I'm seeking justice, and B, because I want others to understand how dangerous and toxic this organization can be. And I also want to put my story out there in case there are other victims so that they don't feel so alone in whatever it is that they're going through. Because I know when I was going through my abuse, I felt really alone. And I think I even felt more alone afterwards, after it was all over. So, that's just a little disclaimer. Also, this video could be triggering. So, if things like sexual abuse are triggering to you, you might want to pass the video up. If it's easier for you to read, you could always go to my blog at Surviving Church and Childhood on WordPress. And if you go all the way back to the beginning, the very first post, Church 2, kind of lays out what happened to me. So if reading is a little bit easier than maybe listening to someone talk about it, you could do that. Otherwise, you could just skip it too. That's okay. So I think where I left you was that Steve was trying to kiss me. And it wasn't too long after that when he asked if I would want to go on little day trips with him for his job. So, his job, he sold church pictorial directories through Olin Mills, and he would travel around the state of Wisconsin. And sometimes, it would be like a couple hours away, so a couple hours there and a couple hours back. And he really wanted to have someone to keep him company when he was on the road. So I said sure, and he asked my parents, and they were fine with it. And he told me that he also took his wife's little sisters with him sometimes. So he made it all sound very much like on the up and up and safe, and not something that I needed to be worried about. Well, when I look back on it now as an adult, I have 4 children, and if an adult male came to me and said, "Can I take your 11-year-old daughter out of town? We're going to be gone for 4 hours or 5 hours. Are you okay with that?" I would not be okay with that. Maybe if it was a family member, but like just this rando that I don't really know, who's new, who isn't a close family friend. No, there's no way I would allow that. I just think that my mom uh, was going through so much of her own stuff. And also, I was such a good kid that she never worried about me getting into trouble. So she thought, well, this will get her out of the house. It'll get her away from my stepdad because we had kind of a contentious relationship. And, a lot, like I've said before, a lot of times we didn't have electricity or, there wasn't a lot to do because we were impoverished. So my mom thought this would be an okay idea to give me something to do. I'm not going to lie and say that I haven't wondered if Steve was abusing um, both of Debbie's sisters and myself when he was taking us on these day trips, or if it was just me. Um, I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer to that question is, and I probably won't ever know. But we would go on these trips, and he was very funny. He would make me laugh, and he would tell me all about his experiences in the world. The bands that he played in, the people that he knew. He was always kind of telling me what a ladies' man he was, and how he had had all of these girlfriends and he had been married before, and that um, leaving, it seemed to me that leaving that scene of being really popular and playing in the bands that he played in and all of that was kind of hard for him. Like, that was kind of an exciting, active life. And he had moved into this much more sedated, um, boring, maybe even life, because we all know that in the UPC you can't do anything. So it's not the most exciting place to to live. And so he just seemed to have this longing for the past. And so he would tell me all about it, and I was interested because I didn't know anybody who had lived that kind of a life. So that was fascinating to me. But when I look back on it now, sort of telling me what a Casanova he was and how many women he had been with and all of that was just completely inappropriate conversation to be having with an 11-year-old girl. It just wasn't appropriate. And I think it was part of the grooming process. I think he wanted me to see him as someone who was desirable to the opposite sex. Um, I don't really know that those stories had the impact that he thought that they would, but he told me the stories nonetheless. He also talked to me a lot, depending on his mood and where he was mentally, about his marriage and how unhappy he was and how lonely he was. And he talked to me a lot about his sex life with his wife and his lack of a sex life with his wife, and how it was very difficult for him to remain faithful and to deal with his like normal male urges because she wouldn't take care of him. So, as a kid, I didn't really understand what he was talking about. The way that he framed it was that, because he was an adult male, he had these needs and his wife wasn't meeting these needs. And so it was making his life really hard. It was making him physically uncomfortable. And because I had no idea what it would be like to be in a marriage where your partner wasn't having sex with you on a regular basis and wasn't affectionate with you and didn't give you that physical closeness that you needed. I had no way to gauge how serious of a problem it was. But he seemed to be really distraught. And at one point, it's kind of funny, I suggested to him that he go talk to Pastor Grant. And he told me that he did. He didn't really get much help. So, at least according to him, he didn't get much help. So, that was not something that was going to help him solve his problem, at least not, that was what he communicated to me. Um, so, over time, his physical um, interactions with me became more and more severe. He basically, during this time, he did everything except have intercourse with me. And you have to remember, again, I was 11 and 12 when this was going on. I had no experience with any boys at all. And I had no, you know, there wasn't the internet. I didn't have any idea even what was going on. And sometimes when he would be physically engaged with me, he would say things to me like he was encouraging me, but I didn't know what he wanted. So I couldn't do whatever it was that he was encouraging me to do because I was so clueless about what was even going on. And most of the time, I was very dissociated. I would separate myself from my body and kind of feel like I was looking down on what was happening. And um, it was really hard because there, again, like I said in the previous video, there was a part of me that wanted that physical closeness and affection because I was a really lonely kid and because my parents were just so consumed with their own lives that they weren't really giving me the affection that I needed. So, there was a part of me that enjoyed the hugs and enjoyed the closeness. But then there was this other part of me that felt the danger of the situation that I was in with him. Um, there were a lot of times when things would happen, like if he exposed himself to me or tried to get me to touch his penis or something like that. Um, I would comply, but it was very robotic and very scary for me because, again, I didn't have any experience or context for what was going on, and I didn't know how to stop it. Um, it was like this train that was just gaining momentum, and I didn't know where the end would be. I didn't know where it was going to end up, and I didn't know how far it was going to go. And I didn't even really understand how sex worked. So it was scary. And what I would experience is he would have these interactions with me where he would say things to me like, "It's so hard for me to believe that you are the age that you are because of the way your body looks, because I matured really early." And so when I think about those things, I recognize that like he knew that I was a little girl and was trying to sort of figure out in his mind how someone could be my age and have the body that I had, or at least, when I'm feeling charitable, that's what I think, is that he's trying to figure it out. Um, there were other times, though, when he treated me like I was a grown woman and like he thought I understood um, what he wanted, and sometimes would get uh, frustrated with me that I wasn't complying or doing something in a way that he wanted me to, when really, like, how would you do those things if you didn't even know what they were? Um, Sometimes afterwards, he would be very affectionate with me and, park about a block away from my house so that he could give me a kiss and a hug and say goodbye properly, or the way he wanted to, because he wasn't going to do that in front of my house. Um, Sometimes afterwards, he would get very upset and talk to me about how we needed to repent and how he wasn't going to do it again and how this was like a really bad thing. And I would feel, I was always in the situation of feeling like he wanted me there. He asked me to come on these day trips with him, but then he made me feel guilty for the fact that he couldn't control his urges around me. And so I didn't really understand what I was supposed to do in this situation. Like, if he needed me as a friend to be there for him when he's on these road trips because he can't handle being alone, but then he's going to blame me for the fact that he can't keep his hands off of me. Like, my 11, 12-year-old brain just could not figure out what I was supposed to do in that situation. As time went on, it became harder and harder for me because I would sit in church and I would see him speak in tongues and go down to the altar and pray and be elevated up on the stage playing his instrument. We would go to family camp and he would, be so popular with all of these ministers and their wives and whatnot. And I would see him in that context. And it was so different from the context that I would see him in when he was alone with me. And he really made me feel like, he would have this perfect walk with God if it were not for the fact that he was so tempted by me, that I was his Achilles. And I look back on it now knowing what I know, and it just makes me angry because I suffered a lot of guilt. And I would go home and I would pray from, verses in the Bible. I would sit in the dark and cry and pray on my knees next to the bed, asking God to forgive me for making him fall, asking God to forgive me for my own sin. Um, Asking God to help him so that he would be able to resist. And so it put me through a lot of emotional turmoil. Um, then it kind of turned into this thing where it was almost like he would say to me, well, I would really like to take you to Sturtevant or, wherever he was going. But I'm not going to touch you. I am not going to touch you. We're going to go. It's going to be fine, but I'm not going to touch you. And I would be like, okay, that's fine. And we would go and it would be okay for a while. And then he would end up, abusing me. And then he would make me feel guilty afterwards and say, we really shouldn't be doing this. It was like he made me feel like he wanted this personal victory for himself. Like, I'm going to go with you and I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to show that I can go and not do it. And then he would do it. And then he would be mad at me. And usually, because I was such a shy kid and I was such a quiet kid, I wouldn't argue with him. But towards the end, I started to get a little bit salty. I started to push back on him a little bit and say, well, then maybe I shouldn't, be alone with you anymore. Maybe, you need to work on this outside of our interaction. And he would get really angry with me. I can remember him, being very close to shouting, like being very loud and emphatic. And so, that was really hard. And I didn't know how to handle it. I can remember one time coming home after being with him and my cheeks were really red from his stubble, and my mom kind of commenting on like, why are your cheeks so red? But then nothing was ever said of it. Like, if the adults around me suspected that something was going on, nobody said anything. And I was kind of under the impression that no one knew about these day trips, so other than like Steve's wife and my parents. But I have since found out that people knew that I was going with him. And so then I have the question of like, how did all of these adults know? And nobody think that it was unusual or dangerous for a young girl to be going out with this guy. I think what it all boils down to really is this idea that, like, well, if someone is a, quote, good Christian man, he can be trusted and you don't need to worry. And of course, his motivations are pure. And then when it turns out to be bad, then it's like, well, it must have been something that this young woman did to cause this man of God to fall. When the reality is, like, he chased me and pursued me. And led me down this path and took advantage of the fact that I was a lonely kid, that I was a kid that no one was paying attention to, and that, I was economically disadvantaged and in some sense, like racially disadvantaged. So, like, he took advantage of all of that. And that was just more of the grooming process kind of coming to bear. So I think I'm going to leave this part here. This is part 2. And I'm probably going to record part 3 and post it right away. So if you want to watch part 3, I'll see you in a little bit. Bye.